The border officials of the United Kingdom have detained people carrying large amounts of cash. According to a report by a British daily, the money seized is suspected to have been from the British government's COVID loan schemes. Specifically, the Bounce Back Loan Scheme. This is part of the COVID loan scheme introduced by the Chancellor Rishi Sunak in April 2020. Now, the scheme and the man behind it are caught at the center of a nationwide financial fraud. Here's a quick explainer on what all happened. In April 2020, the British government allotted around £80 billion to help the citizens and businesses during the pandemic. This amount was distributed via three main COVID-19 schemes, out of which the biggest one was called Bounce Back. Under this scheme, £47 billion were distributed to 1.6 million recipients. The government promised to disperse the required loan within 24 hours. So the rules were lenient. Lenders just had to self-certify that they are affected by COVID-19, and the door opened up for fraudsters. Now, as things stand, the lawmakers guarantee that around £17 billion are never going to bounce back at all. And £4.9 billion have been put down as money lost to fraudsters. In January this year, the Treasury Secretary resigned at the House of Lords, citing this loan fraud. He said the bounce back scheme was assisted by a Treasury who has no knowledge of the consequences. And he called the mistakes made in the scheme as schoolboy errors.
The oversight by both BEIS and the British Business Bank of the panel lenders of BBLs has been nothing less than woeful. They have been assisted by the Treasury, who appear to have no knowledge or little interest in the consequences of fraud to our economy or society. Schoolboy errors were made, for example, allowing over 1,000 companies to receive bounce-back loans that were not even trading when COVID struck. They simply failed to understand that company formation agents hold in stock companies with earlier creation dates.
There's more. Just over a month after introducing this scheme, Rishi Sunak even received letters from multiple anti-fraud organizations in Britain. And guess what the Chancellor did? Nothing. Insolvency service records show some took loans to fund gambling, while others spent it on things like home improvement or luxury personal items. As we speak, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer has finally announced a plan to trace the lost pounds. Rishi Sunak has announced a quote-unquote fraud squad. It is a public sector fraud authority which has a budget of £25 million. Its core aim is to crack down on criminal gangs who rip off the taxpayer. So the British government has used another £25 million of taxpayers' money to recover the lost taxpayers' money. And with us on the broadcast this minute is Greg Swenson from London. He is the founding partner of Brigg McAdam Limited. Thanks very much for being here with us. Your initial reaction to what's going on here?
Well, Molly, frankly, I'm not very surprised. I think when this scheme was launched in 2020, it should have just been assumed that the hurry-up fashion, the methodology of getting money into people's hands, companies' hands that were struggling, was a real top issue. So, now there's some amount of regret, and I think in retrospect there were a lot of mistakes made. But I think that the top line mistake was actually executing the plan of stopping the supply side and essentially locking up the economy or shutting down the economy, while showering the economy with too much demand, with too much money. So in retrospect, I mean, it's easy to say now, but I don't think anyone, I think most people assumed there would be some fraud by the way that the scheme was launched. And then the question is, bring some perspective in. Yes, there was fraud. They should prosecute it, but I'm not sure that throwing good money after bad is the right solution. When it's 5 billion or 5.7 billion, that works out to around £8, 8 to 10 pounds per citizen in the UK. The government, wants to prevent this in the future, and I think that's wise. But I'm not sure that spending scarce resources on chasing five billion when they should have known this was going to happen, but there was so much pressure on the government to get money out into the economy, into the private sector. So it's a bit of what we call in America Monday morning quarterbacking. It's easy to say now that we all should have known this or that the government should have known, but I would be surprised if anyone didn't expect some of that to happen. Should they be prosecuted? Absolutely, of course. But I think a little perspective is important, and there are more important lessons to learn from the lockdown and the response of the government.
Right, but the bounce back scheme was assisted by a treasury who has no knowledge of the consequences, and the mistakes have been called schoolboy errors. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that, Molly. I think there were some schoolboy errors made, and they should have known better that, by telling the banks that you're going to provide 100% guarantee, that basically gives the banks license to issue loans without doing the proper due diligence. Of course, again, at the time, nobody wanted due diligence. Everybody, there was a lot of pressure on the government to just get the money out there and maybe relax the typical rules that a bank would normally employ. But still, that's no excuse for it. But I think, we should be looking at the banks and their lax standards as well as the Treasury. But again, I think, upon reflection, the real issue was recklessly shutting down the economy, recklessly showering the demand side with too much stimulus, with too much cash. The same thing happened in the US, and now we have inflation to show for it. And as it turns out, the lockdowns weren't very effective and had negligible effects on the actual outcome of COVID. So, I have to say I'm with Lord Sumption on this, that the governments in the West, the UK and the US as well, had no constitutional authority to tell people that they had to shut down their business or couldn't leave their home. That's the real lesson I think we should learn from this in retrospect.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much
for
joining
having
us
me.
with those
Thank
perspectives. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.